thought I was marrying the perfect man, but what began as love slowly turned into quiet control. When I got pregnant, my life stopped being mine. Every decision, every breath was managed by my husband and his overbearing mother. What should have been a time of joy turned into isolation, judgment, and invisible chains wrapped in the name of care. I stayed silent for too long, but one moment on a crowded bus changed everything. Part 1. I am Evelyn Hart, 29. I used to be a kindergarten teacher in Boston, the kind who found joy in paint-stained aprons, sticky hugs, and the endless questions of curious young minds. But life has a cruel way of unraveling even the most peaceful routines. I never imagined that, 9 months pregnant, with swollen ankles, an aching back, and a soul weighed down by disappointment, I'd be clinging to a pole on a crowded bus, while my husband, Adrian Blackwell, screamed at me in front of strangers. His voice was sharp and cold, each word cutting through the air like a slap. Behind him stood his mother, Lorraine, lips curled into a smug smile, as if she were silently cheering him on. That moment shattered something inside me. It wasn't just the public humiliation. It was the realization that I no longer recognized the man I had vowed to spend my life with. It was the sting of betrayal, the ache of lost hope, and the overwhelming fear of bringing a child into a world where love had started to rot from the inside out. Before I share what came next, the choices I made, the truths I uncovered, I want to know where you're watching from. Please, hit subscribe and leave a comment with your city. Your stories, your voices, they matter. And if you've ever felt trapped in a love that turned into something else entirely, maybe my story will feel familiar. Let me take you back to before Adrian, before the chaos, back when life was simple. I lived in a modest but charming apartment in Cambridge. My classroom was my sanctuary, decorated with crayon drawings and star charts, and echoing with the laughter of tiny voices. Every day brought something new: spilled juice boxes, missing glue sticks, and stories that made no sense but came straight from the heart. I loved it. I lived for it. My parents, Margaret and Edward Hart, were just a short drive away. Sunday dinners were sacred. Dad always brought warm bagels from our favorite bakery, and Mom, still working shifts as a nurse, would fill the kitchen with stories of lives saved and hands held through the night. Their marriage, solid for 35 years, was my blueprint for love, patient, balanced, and filled with mutual respect. On weekends, I hiked with my golden retriever, Rusty, who had a knack for finding every mud puddle in Massachusetts. I volunteered at a local literacy program, believing deeply in the power of words to change lives. Independence was my identity. My friends would tease me, say I was too picky when it came to dating, but I didn't mind. I'd rather be alone than with someone who didn't see my worth. And then I met him. Adrian Blackwell swept into my life at the wedding of my college roommate, Tessa Lane. He was the best man, tall and broad-shouldered with sandy blonde hair and eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. Just as my favorite song began playing at the reception, he approached me with a boyish grin and asked, "May I have this dance?" I thought it was fate. Later, I learned it wasn't chance at all. He'd asked Tessa about my favorite song beforehand. "You teach kindergarten?" he said, spinning me gently on the dance floor. "That takes real patience. I work in hospital administration, nowhere near as meaningful as shaping little lives." He had a quiet charm, humble, kind. He remembered everything I told him, from the name of my dog to the cafe I liked near my school. He asked thoughtful questions. He listened. And when other guests tried to join our conversation, he'd politely nod before turning right back to me. Our first date came the following weekend. Adrian showed up at my door with a bouquet of wildflowers, my favorite. He took me to a cozy Italian restaurant, where the owner greeted him like an old friend. I'd find out later that Adrian had visited twice before, making sure everything would be perfect. And for a while it was. The next 3 months were like something from a romance novel. He'd send coffee to my classroom on tough days, remembered my students' names, helped fix my leaky sink without me even asking. When I came down with a bad cold, he showed up at my place with soup, soft tissues, and every movie I loved from childhood. He made me feel cherished, protected, adored. But now, looking back with clearer eyes, I can see the cracks that had already begun to form. When I'd make plans with friends, Adrian's smile would falter for a second, just long enough to feel like guilt. "I was hoping we could do something together," he'd say, softly, not demanding, just disappointing. If I wore something he thought too bold, he'd say things like, "You look beautiful, but I think you'd be stunning in that other dress. It brings out your eyes more." Always masked as care, never controlling. Not yet. Then there was Lorraine, his mother. He spoke to her every single day. He'd step out for long phone calls, muttering about errands or catching up. When I finally met her 2 months into our relationship, her stare sent chills through me. She scrutinized my clothes, asked about my family's income, even my student loan debt. Just making sure you're a good fit, she'd said with a cold smile. Adrian laughed it off. Mom just worries. She wants the best for me. She called during our dates. He always answered. When I hesitated to voice my discomfort, he grew distant. She's all I have since Dad died. She's lonely. At the time, it felt like loyalty. Now I know it was something far more dangerous. As months passed, Adrian's mask began to slip. He made subtle jabs at my teaching career. It's sweet, but don't you want something with more growth potential? He criticized my apartment, my friends, my cooking, all under the guise of improving my life. Slowly, he chipped away at my confidence until I started questioning every decision I made. Then, 6 months in, he proposed. We were in Cape Cod. The setting was perfect. Wind in my hair, ocean behind us, wildflowers in my hands. The ring sparkled, but it wasn't me. I'd later find out Lorraine had picked it out. Still, I said yes. I wanted to believe in that dream. I wanted to believe in him. My parents were cautious. They suggested a longer engagement. Make sure this is the man who will walk beside you, not in front of you, my father said. I dismissed their concern. I was in love. The wedding was beautiful. White roses, soft music, a historic Boston venue. Lorraine controlled most of it, replacing my choices with her own. This is how a proper wedding should look, she'd say. I didn't fight her. I wanted peace. But during the reception, I overheard Adrian whisper to Lorraine, "Don't worry, Mom. Nothing will change between us." That sentence haunted me. After the wedding, the changes came gradually. Adrian wanted me to quit teaching, focus on our home, he said. We don't need the extra income. Lorraine began visiting weekly, rearranging furniture, insulting my cooking, bringing up Adrian's exes who knew how to make a real lasagna. When I brought up boundaries, Adrian brushed me off. Once we have kids, you'll be glad to have Mom around. Eventually, the talk turned to babies. I was excited, but hesitant. I wanted a child. I didn't want to raise one in a war I had no weapons to fight. And then suddenly, Adrian was all in. I now believe it was Lorraine pulling the strings. She started talking about grandbabies during her visits like she already owned the right to them. I thought things couldn't get worse. Until the day he screamed at me on that bus, with his mother smiling like a queen who'd finally conquered her kingdom. But that moment, painful as it was, marked the beginning of something else, my awakening. What came next changed everything. Follow and share for next part. Part 2. 3 months after our wedding, I found out I was pregnant. You'd think that would be the happiest moment of a woman's life, and for a brief second, it was. I was home alone that morning, feeling unusually tired and uneasy. A part of me already knew, but I needed to see it. I took a test and waited, heart pounding in my chest. 2 pink lines appeared, and just like that, my world shifted. My hands shook with nervous wonder. I was going to be a mother. I sat on the bathroom floor, one hand over my belly, the other holding that tiny strip of plastic like it held the future. Adrian was still at work. I wanted to surprise him, so I prepared a little dinner, lit some candles, and placed the test inside a small box, alongside a pair of tiny white baby booties I had impulsively bought months ago. I imagined the joy on his face, the way he would lift me in his arms, the beginning of our next chapter. When Adrian opened the box, he stared for a long moment, his expression twisted, surprise, then hesitation, and finally a smile, but not the kind that reaches the eyes. We're going to be parents, he said flatly, before pulling me into a hug that felt oddly hollow. Then came the phone call. He didn't even let the news settle between us before calling Lorraine, his mother. You're going to be a grandmother, he said with a strange kind of glee, putting her on speaker. She squealed loud enough to startle me. I'll be there tomorrow to help plan everything, Lorraine declared before I could say a single word. Adrian grinned. That'd be amazing, Mom. And just like that, I was no longer in control. She arrived the next morning with 3 oversized tote bags stuffed with pregnancy books, brochures, organic teas, and a printed spreadsheet titled Smart Pregnancy Plan for Evelyn. She had strong opinions on everything, from vitamins to baby names, and didn't hesitate to make them known. Evelyn needs to understand this isn't just about her anymore, I heard her whisper to Adrian as I sat across from them, hands folded tightly in my lap. Suddenly, I wasn't a glowing mother-to-be. I was a vessel. My first prenatal appointment should have been a special moment between Adrian and me. Instead, Lorraine insisted on coming. She sat beside me in the doctor's office like she was the one carrying the baby. She's been drinking coffee, she announced to Dr. Reynolds, as though accusing me of poisoning her future grandchild. That's harmful, isn't it? The doctor glanced uncomfortably at me. 1 small cup a day is typically fine, she said gently. But before I could speak, Adrian cut in. We'll cut it out completely, just to be safe. Right, honey? He squeezed my hand. It looked sweet. It didn't feel that way. And this is how it began. Every decision about my body, my child, my home, was no longer mine. When we found out the baby was a girl, I offered name ideas I'd dreamed of for years. Lorraine immediately rejected them in favor of names from her side of the family. She has excellent taste, Adrian said with a shrug. She named me, after all. By my 4th month, Lorraine had unofficially moved into our home. What was meant to be a weekend stay to help turned into a permanent fixture. She took over the nursery. Pink and gray walls, ruffled curtains, stuffed elephants I didn't pick. I didn't even like pink, but I didn't have the energy to argue anymore. She rearranged my kitchen, stocked it with fertility teas and supplements. "You're doing it wrong," she'd say, as I folded baby clothes or cooked dinner. Her words carved into me like knives, dull but relentless. Adrian? He defended her every time. "Mom raised me just fine. Maybe you should listen to her." As my belly grew, my world shrank. Adrian canceled my lunch dates with friends. "You can't risk getting sick from someone like Tessa. She sounded like she had a cold. My parents can visit after the birth. It'll just stress you out now." He installed a security system that pinged his phone every time a door opened. "Just for your safety." He began checking my phone under the excuse that we should share everything. Even my calls with my parents were suddenly on speaker. Either Adrian or Lorraine would sit beside me, monitoring every word. My best friend Stephanie once tried to visit. She brought baby gifts, hopeful chatter, warmth I hadn't felt in weeks, but I never saw her. Lorraine intercepted her at the door. "Evelyn's resting," she lied. I found out days later when Stephanie texted, "Hope you're feeling better. Your mother-in-law seemed very protective." The walls around me tightened further. Adrian convinced me to combine our finances to make things easier, but soon I wasn't allowed to buy maternity clothes without his approval. When I asked for new shoes for my swelling feet, I had to justify the purchase twice. Meanwhile, Lorraine ordered herself a brand new iPad so she could do research for the baby. When I raised the issue, Adrian didn't flinch. "It's about priorities. Mom understands what the baby really needs." By my 7th month, I felt like a prisoner. I had to report where I was at all times. If I was 10 minutes late from the grocery store, I'd return to missed calls and Adrian waiting in the driveway, arms crossed, accusing eyes masked with concern. The stress was unbearable. At my 30-week checkup, Dr. Reynolds noted my blood pressure had spiked. I'd stopped gaining weight. My body was sending signals I could no longer ignore. "Are you under any unusual stress at home, Evelyn?" she asked, her eyes kind for the first time in weeks. Lorraine had stepped out to take a call. I opened my mouth. Then Adrian walked back in. "We're just excited," he answered. "Everything's fine at home." "Right, honey." He looked at me, his eyes daring me to contradict him. I nodded. Dr. Reynolds didn't look convinced. She prescribed bed rest and told me to reduce stress, knowing full well I had no control over either. That night, I locked myself in the bathroom and sat on the floor, hugging my knees, crying silently. My daughter kicked against my ribs, a gentle reminder that she was still there, still counting on me. "I'll protect you," I whispered. "Somehow I'll protect you." I just didn't know how yet. The morning of the bus incident felt like any other in my final trimester. My body ached, my sleep was broken, and Adrian had scheduled yet another appointment to monitor my blood pressure. "Lorraine will meet us at the clinic," he said, already tightening his grip on the day. I didn't know that what would happen next, on that crowded bus, would be the moment that cracked everything wide open. Part 3. Adrian made the announcement casually over breakfast, scraping the burnt edges off toast he had made without asking if I even wanted any. But I didn't say anything. I knew better. Arguing over toast would only spiral into a lecture about pregnancy nutrition and thinking of the baby. "I thought this was just a checkup," I said cautiously, measuring every word like a landmine. "Does Lorraine really need to come with us?" His jaw clenched. The knife froze midway through his toast. "She's concerned about you and the baby. She has every right to be there." I said nothing. I was too tired to fight. The appointment was tense from the moment we walked into Dr. Reynolds' office. My blood pressure was worse than ever, dangerously high. Dr. Reynolds gently suggested we begin discussing the possibility of inducing labor early. Before I could even process what that meant, Lorraine jumped in. "Would a cesarean be safer than a natural birth?" she asked, as though I wasn't in the room. "She wants a natural birth," Adrian responded firmly, except we had never actually talked about my wishes. After the appointment, instead of calling a car like usual, Adrian announced that we would be taking the bus home. "The walk will help your blood pressure," he insisted. Dr. Reynolds had just recommended rest, but Adrian had already decided. The bus was packed. Afternoon rush. I stepped on awkwardly, holding my lower back with one hand and gripping the metal pole with the other. My body was swollen, exhausted, and every movement felt like a burden. An older gentleman noticed me and stood up immediately. "Please take my seat," he offered with a warm smile. Gratefully, I thanked him and lowered my aching body into the plastic seat. My ankles throbbed. My spine protested. For a brief second, I let myself breathe. Adrian and Lorraine remained standing nearby. Lorraine sighed dramatically and shifted her weight. "These young people today," she muttered loud enough for the entire front half of the bus to hear. "No respect, No one offers a seat to a woman my age anymore. A woman with a book looked up briefly, then back down. A few others buried their faces in their phones. No one said a word. 10 minutes passed. At a busy stop, the bus filled even more. A teenager with headphones bumped lightly into Lorraine as he squeezed by. That was the trigger. Adrian's face turned red. Fury twisted his features. He lunged toward me, gripping my upper arm so tightly that I could already feel the bruises forming. "Why are you sitting while my mom is standing?" he barked. "Get up now." I stared at him stunned. "I'm 9 months pregnant," I whispered, barely able to believe what was happening. "I don't care. Mom needs to sit." His voice grew louder, angrier. He pulled at my arm, trying to yank me out of the seat. "Get up!" The bus went silent. Every eye turned toward us. A woman clutched her toddler closer. The driver watched through the mirror. And then she stood, 3 rows back. A small, silver-haired woman with piercing blue eyes slowly rose. She looked barely over 5 feet, but when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of a mountain. "Take your hands off her, right now." Adrian turned, surprised. "This is between me and my wife," he growled. "My mother needs to sit." The woman, Eleanor, I would later learn, stepped forward until she stood between us. Despite being a foot shorter, she didn't flinch. "There are 2 people in that seat," she said firmly, nodding toward my belly, "and neither one of them should be standing. Shame on you." She turned to Lorraine. "And shame on you for letting your son treat his pregnant wife and your grandchild this way." A hush fell over the bus, and then the murmurs began. A man in a business suit stood. "If it's really that urgent, the older lady can have my seat," he said coolly, though his tone made it clear he thought it wasn't. Adrian's mask cracked and quickly morphed. He slipped into his polished public persona, the well-liked hospital administrator. "This is just a misunderstanding," he said with a fake chuckle. "My wife hasn't been feeling well. We're both just concerned for her and the baby." Lorraine chimed in, voice dripping with faux concern. "Her blood pressure is high. She's not thinking clearly. Their performance might have worked if Eleanor hadn't seen the truth." "That's not what I saw," she said with conviction. "You grabbed her. You yelled at her. You tried to force a heavily pregnant woman to stand on a moving bus." Others began to speak up. "I saw him hurt her," a college student near the front added. "I'm a nurse," said a woman in scrubs. "That wasn't concern. That was control." The bus driver pulled over. He stood and walked toward us. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, eyes locking on mine. "Do I need to call someone?" And right there, surrounded by strangers who showed more kindness than my own husband ever had, something snapped inside me, or maybe something woke up. Every moment I had justified, every red flag I had explained away, every cruel word disguised as care, every time I was silenced, monitored, dismissed, isolated, every piece of myself that I had quietly given up, thinking I was just being a good wife, a good mother-to-be. I finally saw it all clearly. This wasn't love. This was abuse. I looked at Adrian, and I didn't see the charming man I had fallen for. I saw the man who had chipped away at my freedom until I didn't recognize myself. I looked at Lorraine, and I didn't see a concerned mother. I saw the engineer of my prison. I turned to the driver. My voice didn't shake. "Yes," I said, "there's a problem." I stared at Adrian. "I don't want to go home with them." Final part. The bus driver pulled over. He stood and walked toward us. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, eyes locking on mine. "Do I need to call someone?" "Yes," I said, steady now. "There's a problem. I don't want to go home with them." The bus was still. No one spoke. No one breathed. Even the humming engine seemed to pause, as though waiting for my next word. The driver nodded. "Then you won't," he said, pulling a small radio from his belt. "We'll get someone here to help." Adrian stepped forward, panicked. "Evelyn, let's not overreact." "Don't," I whispered. "Don't say my name like it belongs to you." For the first time in years, he hesitated. Not because he understood, but because the spell, the quiet submission he'd nurtured for so long, was gone. When the police arrived, I gave them everything. Calmly, clearly. I showed them the purple marks blooming on my arm where Adrian had grabbed me. I described the pressure, the control, the financial manipulation, the isolation. They took me to the hospital for observation. Adrian wasn't arrested that day, but the report was filed, and that was the beginning. The moment my daughter and I were safe, the woman from the bus, Eleanor, sat beside me in the hospital waiting room. "You were brave," she said, handing me a warm cup of tea. "Braver than most." I believed her. I moved into a women's recovery shelter. Small, safe, filled with soft lighting and women who looked like me. Women who had survived love that turned into chains. With help from their legal team, I filed for separation. Adrian was served papers while sitting in a boardroom at his hospital. I imagined Lorraine's shriek when she read the envelope he handed her. I changed my number, blocked every known contact, created a private email under a different name. I stayed with the shelter until I found a 1-bedroom apartment with creaky floors and a view of nothing, but it was mine. I painted the nursery myself, yellow, not pink. Sunlight spilled across the room each morning like a promise. I gave birth to my daughter in silence, surrounded only by people I trusted. My parents, a doula, and the nurse who held my hand when the pain bent me in half. I named her Lila, not after anyone, just after hope. As Lila napped beside me, I opened my laptop for the first time in months. The blinking cursor stared back. I began to write, not about Adrian, not about Lorraine, but about women like me, about the kind of abuse that leaves no bruises but breaks bones all the same, about how it starts small, too small to notice, until you look in the mirror and don't recognize the woman blinking back. I didn't write for revenge. I wrote for truth. I shared it on a small blog under a pseudonym. A week later, a mother from Idaho shared it, then another from Oregon, then Australia, then a journalist messaged me. I think you're onto something. I wrote more. I joined a nonprofit focused on maternal abuse survivors. They flew me to a conference, my first trip away from Lila. I told my story on stage, anonymously. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but it was heard. 8 months later, Adrian's world began to unravel, quietly, devastatingly. An anonymous letter reached his hospital board. It included screenshots from my blog, redacted but unmistakable, a copy of the police report, a formal complaint. The board didn't act immediately, of course not, but whispers started. Meetings became colder. He was quietly put on administrative review. Lorraine's carefully curated community also began to crumble. A copy of my now viral post appeared in her church bulletin. She denied it, of course, played the misunderstood mother. But the group she'd once dominated with her opinions no longer returned her calls. Her friends dropped off, one by one. Invitations dried up. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the center of attention. She was radioactive. They never saw it coming. When Lila turned 1, I mailed a single envelope to the house Adrian and Lorraine still shared. It was simple. A photograph of Lila smiling in the sunlight, her tiny hand clutching a daisy. No return address, no message. Inside that silence, I imagined Lorraine's breath catching, Adrian's fingers trembling, the realization dawning. They had lost everything, and not through some scandal, not through courtroom drama or screaming matches, but because I had walked away, built something better, and never looked back. Adrian's leave became permanent. He wasn't fired. They called it a mutual separation. But no hospital would touch him again. His references were vague, his confidence, once so sharp, dulled by invisible guilt. Lorraine sold the house a few months later, said it was too big, too empty. Adrian moved into a rented apartment above a shuttered cafe. Lorraine followed, of course, refusing to be alone. They were still together, united in misery. Once bonded in control, now bonded in isolation. Every choice they made, the insults, the spying, the manipulation, led them there. I didn't have to destroy them. They did it themselves. People often ask if I forgave them, if I'd ever let them meet Lila. My answer is always the same. No, not because I'm bitter, but because some doors should never be reopened. I live simply now. I teach again. Small groups. Creative writing. I help other women tell their stories, even when their voices shake. Lila grows every day, bright and stubborn. She doesn't know their names. She never will. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I look at her and wonder how close I came to raising her in that prison. I wonder what kind of mother I would have been if I hadn't escaped. And then I thank the woman on the bus, the one who stood when I couldn't. I stand outside a classroom, sunlight washing over my face. Inside, children laugh and paint. My daughter, now a toddler, runs toward me with paint on her hands. I lift her into my arms. I don't think I could ever be happier. A dark apartment, on the other hand. Lorraine sits alone at the kitchen table, drinking lukewarm tea. Adrian stares blankly at a turned-off TV. The photograph of Lila sits on the shelf. Their world is silent. And that silence is my final, sweetest revenge. Please comment down your thoughts if this story moved you in any way. Thank you for staying with me throughout my journey.